So if you're here for the matinee of the Breakfast Club, prepare to be disappointed. Actually, that's not bad advice for the rest of you. Hi, I'm Chris Morris. I work for Living Social, and I work in our international group. And while Living Social is an unusual startup, we still have the same kinds of stuff. And Jeff Dagley, you stole my picture. Like any startup, you have to feed the business what it likes to eat. And since building actual spreadsheets can be a pain, a clever developer will figure out that you can toss some CSV views their way, and everyone will be happy, as long as they're in the US. But you start making international acquisitions, as you are wont to do, and then the French guys are screaming at you that their umlauts look like chewed croissant. So you do a little research and figure out you can slam a byte order mark in the front of your content, and everyone's happy as long as you're on Windows. But if you're on the Mac, you're still screwed. So a little more research and you realize you're going to have to suck it up and do it right. Well, in my case, that meant a lot of CSV views. So after a little bit of work, we came up with some secret sauce and put it in a gem called Excelinator, and we're using this in production now. And if you've got controller code like this, you can throw a one-liner in, and now you've got a real spreadsheet from your CSV view. Unfortunately, a lot of our controller code looked like this, and I really wasn't a fan of writing 4 lines of code times 70, 80 controllers. So I thought, what would it take to go the next step and not have to write any controller code? And I thought I would share my findings with you today. So given this report controller without any code and a simple HTML view, we're shifting from CSV to HTML. The dirty little secret of Excel is that if you feed it an HTML table, it'll automatically grok the table cells and convert them into cells. That's not a trick that works with a lot of alternate spreadsheet programs, though. But given this setup and a request for Excel, our goal here is to take these 2 routes, the top one being the default HTML format and then the XLS format, and make both of these work without any code. So before we hack, we have to do something that anybody would have to do and register the XLS MIME type, but now to the hacks. First thing we have to do is hack the MIME response collector. You might be asking yourself, what is the MIME response collector? It's that thing. It's the thing that's yielded from the respond to. So we hack this by going into its constructor and making sure the XLS MIME type is available all the time, and we can start by getting rid of those 4 lines of code. But we're not good yet. We next have to hack the lookup context. The lookup context is an internal Rails object that contains all of your criteria that it needs to find your view. If you've ever come across a template is missing exception, then most of the data that's in this exception comes from the lookup context. So we need to hack it so that when the XLS format is put into it, we can say, no, HTML is fine, we're good. That's technically all you have to do to make this work, but there are some side effects. One, you probably don't want your layouts shown in your spreadsheet, although technically Excel does a decent job of doing that if you want some ugly-looking headers and footers. But in this case, we don't, so we need to override the normalize options of the abstract controller layouts module, and doing that, undo the work of finding your layout by assigning nil to that if this is an XLS request. Our last hack is to tell Excel what encoding is going on. So we got to jack in this HTML encoding thing, and then we do the always recommended scanning of HTML with a regular expression, and prepend that with the encoding meta tag. This is also a convenient place for us to stick in our MIME type. We take these 2 modules, mix them into Action Controller Base, and we can go from this in our browser to this in our spreadsheet. And Tony Romo's a happy man. And this guy, and this guy, and these people, and that guy, and that guy, and that guy, and that guy, and what? And this is an internationalization talk, so I have to do this. It's in Dutch, but I have no idea what it says. So the question is, can you do this? Should you do this? Well, one of the pros is that you learn a lot about how things work underneath the covers, and when you have a leaky abstraction, that might come in handy if you feel like doing some Rails plumbing. Con is it's kind of time-consuming, especially when there's some really good tutorials on how to do a rendering engine properly. You're also bringing on some risk by hacking this stuff into every request. And theoretically, hacking the internals of Rails can be a bad idea because you never know what's going to change underneath you, although in this case, I was able to go from 2.3 to 3 with a little bit of code, and then from then on, it's been free-wheeling fun. So that's it. The top link is Excelinator, the gem we use in production. The middle link is the code in this talk, and that's me on Twitter. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Thom Browne. I'm going to talk about using a gem called Rack OAuth 2. It supports both OAuth providers and clients. I'm going to focus on providers in this 5 minutes. I'm Tom with the With on Twitter, and there's a link to the gem right there. And you can find this on bigruby-rack-oauth2.herokuapp.com. The mantra for OAuth is get a token, use a token, and so kind of as an example, because some people might not be familiar with OAuth, I'm going to use Dwala, which is a really neat payment service that exposes an OAuth API. So I've got links to their documentation for getting a token and using a token. The get a token step is you redirect, OAuth client redirects a user to the provider for an authorization form where the user decides to accept what the client application needs. So here's an example with Dwala. The client's asking to make payments on behalf of the user. And then step 2 is use a token. So you just take the token that you received in the first step as a client, and you make a post or whatever. In this case, it's making a payment to bill@recipient.com, and so that's it. Get a token, use a token. James Edward Gray at Lone Star RubyConf 5 had this excellent keynote where he talked about the need for skepticism, and we should be skeptical of OAuth gems in the sense that OAuth was originally supposed to be a protocol and not a framework, and it should be a protocol like HTTP and just do protocol typey things. And if your gem is doing more than that, then you should be skeptical. And furthermore, oftentimes when people say, just use the code and don't worry about the details of the authorization or authentication, what they really mean is you really do need to worry about the details, because there's probably a well-known bug in their gem. This is Novu Mitaki. They're on the left at Internet Identity Workshop. His Twitter is Nov. And what he has is a gem, which is just a simple rack module, and he's got an example project that I've linked to, which shows you how, for instance, do a Rails project using the gem. And we're going to look at that very quickly. Here's the mailing list. Here's the OAuth security IETF spec, which is recently approved. And oftentimes people try to use OAuth for authentication. It's not an authentication protocol, it's an authorization protocol. So the first skeptical thing you should ask is, does this gem that's trying to do authentication, has it addressed this implicit grant threat in this security spec? And oftentimes it hasn't. And so it's very easy for someone to lure somebody to a client because and get a token, say a rogue OAuth client, and then if they get that token, they can use that token at another client and impersonate the user if that other client's using implicit flow for OAuth. So that's a huge vulnerability. And sometimes you don't even need to lure the user. Oftentimes, OAuth clients have their database of tokens exposed, in this case, face.com, after they revealed that their database had exposed all their OAuth tokens. Facebook acquired them. Why wouldn't they? So when you're approaching this gem, what you should do, it can be intimidating at first. What I suggest is consider step 2 first, and then go back and consider step 1. So step 2 is just using the token, right? So you post, try to do a transaction using the token, and all you have to do is in your config application or Rails app, you configure the rack module, and then here you just look up your access token in your database, make sure that it's not expired. If it isn't valid, then you just reject it right there before you even hit your Rails application. Here's what you put in your application controller. The below function require OAuth user token. What it does is just finds your access token, excuse me, and then it finds out what user is associated with that access token, and then you set your user that way, just as if the user had logged in. And then go back to step 1, get a token. And then here you can see code. And this is, all these are taken out from the example project that Novu provides. And this is what you do. You present the form when the user visits it, and then he submits the form and it comes back here, and then you approve it. Is that 5? Okay, thank you.
Yes, microphone. Okay. Hi, I don't do Ruby, but I still come here because it's lots of fun. I used to be a regular at Dallas RB, so I know some of you. And thanks to Lightning Talks at Dallas RB, I've spent the last 3 years traveling the world speaking at conferences. So Lightning Talks are good. So I've been working on lots of interesting things lately, and my latest experiment is I created a new programming language. So I'm going to briefly show you some bits of it. Why are you not mirrored again? Okay. The goal of my language is to talk while doing things. There we go. You got to click the keep button. So it's a very minimal language. It's got some ideas from Ruby, some ideas from JavaScript, some ideas from Lua, I don't know, whatever. But my target audience is people learning to program. Back when I lived here and attended Dallas RB, I would teach Ruby to grade school kids. And they picked it up pretty fast. And since then, I've taught JavaScript to grade school kids, and I wanted something simpler. So this language is very minimal. There are no prototypes. There are no classes. There is no dynamic scope at all. You just have functions and closures, and everything is lexical. And I'm going to write backends for it that runs on the web, that runs natively. It's going to be fun. It's a lot of work. Just a quick look at the syntax. We have null for null, true and false. We got integers. I don't actually have floating points yet because I don't find them that useful. I'll probably add them. I've got strings. I've got a buffer primitive. So if you need some binary data, you can just embed it in your code there. None of this base 64 stuff. And I have a very short and terse function literal. It's just curly braces, your arguments bar, your body. Because everything in this function revolves around these function literal. They're like Ruby lambdas. And so a square function is this function literal, a cube is that, or they can be multi-line. You can declare local variables in them. And that's pretty much the whole language. I have some custom looping. Let's see. There we go. So you can loop over objects as key value pairs. You can loop over list as key values where the keys are the indexes. You can loop over functions, and it'll just keep calling the function until it returns null. So you can make custom lazy generators. I've got your basic arithmetic, and if, else if, while loops. I mean, that's it. That's the whole language. You just learned it. So you can no longer say you don't know Jack. This language is called Jack, as you now know Jack. So I was thinking showing syntax is boring, so I'm going to do a demo. So I asked 2 people to come help me, if they could come on up. And I'm going to plug in 3 gamepads to my laptop, because why not? I purposely brought my Linux laptop today just in case I was able to give a lightning talk. Because one nice thing about Linux is, there you go. The I/O devices are just files. So, well, that could be a problem. I'm using one of them for the KVM. So you 2 can play while I watch. How's that sound? There's only 3 USB ports. All right, so I wrote this small program. Let me load it up. Called Gamepad. And what it's going to do is it's going to open dev input JS0, dev input JS1, JS2 is going to fail. And I'm going to make a few bots. And these are they're just functions. There's no classes. So the bot function takes a name and does stuff. The player function takes a path to the device and a name and does stuff. And I have this joystick function that talks to the joystick. Here it's parsing the Linux kernel stuff, which looks like garbage. Let me show you. Dev input JS0. All right, one of you move your joystick around. That's the one. So on Linux, you can do this. You can just read this. And it's documented in the kernel documentation what this looks like. So great. So instead, let's just now try it. Oh, I need to fix that. This is what comments are for. All right. I planned this, but I forgot this. Okay. Before I start the game engine. All right, now move your joysticks around. So we've got green and red player, and we're seeing all their input events parsed. So you got buttons, axes. That's great. All right, enough of that. Undelete that code. Now, where is that crazy print? That one. We don't want that print statement anymore. That is bad. All right, now let's try it again. We got 3 bots, 2 players, and 1 dead player. Can the red one move? It's your left one.
There we go. Got it.
Yeah. And you could write the same program easily in Ruby using Event Machine because you just need some sort of non-blocking way to read these 2 device things and then parse it.
Am I winning? Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, I've only got 5 minutes, so that's about it. Thank you.
All right. My name is Keith Bennett, and I'd like to talk to you about JRuby. JRuby is the synergistic, provides a synergy of the language of Ruby, which we know and love, with the Java virtual machine, and its maturity, its stability, the multi-threading, and the vast array of libraries that are available for it. One of which is Apache Tika. Tika is a open source Java library. I was a committer on it a few years ago before I made my daring escape to Ruby land. And it coordinates and controls other open source Java libraries that parse documents of various types. There's a developer in Sweden named Richard Nyström who developed a Ruby wrapper for Tika. And hold on a second, I'm gonna. As you can see, there's these functions here that make it very easy to parse data. And we're going to try that in IRB. And then we get the content. And then we get the metadata. And as you can see, there are a lot of fields there. The various parser libraries that Tika uses represent several person years of effort, a lot of work, and you have this all for free in Ruby with Rika. Let's start talking about the multi-threading aspects of JRuby. We heard yesterday that MRI Ruby has a global interpreter lock that prevents more than one CPU from being used by Ruby, no matter how many threads are running. Let's take a look. Oh, by the way, we'll be using this function as a thread function for every, it'll just loop and get a random number from 0 to 10 million minus 1. And when the number is 0, the thread is going to sleep for 2 seconds. Okay, we're trying it with Ruby 1.9 first, MRI. And let's look at the activity monitor. And I don't know if you can see, but it's about 100%. That means one CPU. Let's try it now in JRuby. And as you can see, it's visibly faster. Let's look again at the activity monitor. And we see it's 200, whoops, 300, clearly many more CPUs than MRI Ruby. Now let's take a look in Visual VM, which is a free tool that comes for the JDK. It shows all the Java virtual machines it finds running. We pick this one. We look at the threads. We have the 5 threads here, and yellow means it's sleeping. Visual VM has a lot of cool things. You can also see this in table mode. And if you want to just examine a single thread, here's one of those threads that was running. We also have a sampler, which will show us memory consumption by class, and CPU consumption by function. and an overall monitor that shows us what's going on. On the lighter side, this is a JRuby program I wrote that uses the Java Swing libraries to visualize a game of life implementation. And if you write game of life whatever way you like, as long as it conforms to a contract of 5 or 6 methods, I think, you can use this to visualize that model. So this is a way we can use Java libraries, and totally on the client side, there's no network communication going on here. So once in a while, you might find a use case for this. Another great strength of Java is the internationalization support that you get. You get about 150 locales right out of the box. Oh, by the way, another thing I wanted to mention, I wrote the integer formatting function so that if it found that it was running in JRuby, it would use the number format and put the appropriate 1,000 separators in there. So you see, I don't know if you noticed, but we have commas in these numbers, and we didn't have them before. I'm going to stop it now. This is just a short script I wrote to display the locales in the Java runtime. And as you can see, we have the country name and the locale code, which includes a country, language, and variant, optionally. And we have date, number, and currency formats. This is the medium date format. There's also short and long formats as well. There's just a lot in the JVM that we as Ruby developers can exploit if we want to. So thanks very much. If you have any other questions about JRuby, please find me.
Okay. Okay, so winding back to the beginning. Whee! All right, you have seen the future. So I'm Marshall Yunt. I'm a Dallas Rubyist, and by day I like to hack on scalability and performance problems, and at night I like to work on art projects. I'm going to talk about an art project that I did to support a Burning Man art project for 2012. It's called Connectable Pipe. So this probably goes without saying, but I love going to Burning Man because, like in the Ruby community, we build a lot of cool, beautiful stuff. The main difference between Burning Man and the Ruby community is at the end of the event, we like to set our stuff on fire and blow it up. We can do a little bit of that. So the project that I was working on last year is called the Ball of Light. And these are aluminum rings that are 25 feet in diameter, and they have 12 intersection points. So at each one of these 12 intersection points, we mounted a computer-controlled DJ light and strapped one of these things to the side. Does anybody have one of these in the audience? So this is a Microsoft Kinect. It's got 2 cameras for binocular vision and a infrared camera for depth perception. And it also has a couple of microphones and some other things that we didn't use on this project. And so the idea was the Kinect would drive the computer-controlled DJ lights and make little light shows. So in digging into this, I first stumbled onto this library called OpenNI. It's from the same people that make the Kinect. And it had a couple of problems with it. So the very first problem with it is everything inside is C++, and I hate C++. So I don't like C++ because it doesn't have a REPL. It's hard to test, and I've forgotten what all those damn compiler warnings mean. The other problem that this library has is that it's LGPL, which is probably fine for everyone else, but I prefer to release my stuff under MIT and Apache licenses. And I wanted to put out some Ruby gems associated with the project. And so I wanted to be able to fix both of these problems. So I looked to Unix and the core principle of everything is a file, like Tim mentioned earlier. And because I wanted to write code like this. So I had to write a little bit of stub C++ in order to get this to work. And so my C++ is terrible. So you see in my code there's a lot of like handwritten JSON serialization. It's amazingly easy to get lots of bugs with this kind of crap, as you might expect. So this particular slice of the project is probably the worst code that I've written in like 10 years. But it's the absolute minimally viable C++ required in order to get JSON output at the command line. So what does it look like? It winds up looking like this. And that's probably not super legible, so I'll tab forward to the next slide. And I've highlighted one in the middle. This is basically an array. There's one array for each user, and then each user has like 10 or 15 different points on the user's body. And so there's like a right elbow and a left elbow, and they each have an XYZ coordinate form. And that, again, was, I did all this work so that I could support this type of a model. And we have time probably for a little demo. It would help if I didn't unplug the monitor. Okay, so. Okay, so I didn't ask for a volunteer, but I'm going to make Mark walk this way towards me. There's a little status message at the top that says it's seeking users. Oh, it found him. And oh. So now it just starts barfing out tons and tons and tons of data. The Connect will actually spit stuff out at, I think, 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second. It's actually, do the robot. So let me break out of this and tab back over to Keynote. Resuming where we left off. So what this supports is participant detection, which is like when people walk into the frame, you can pick up quite a few people doing this way. It'll only do the joint decomposition for 2 people, and that's a limitation of the Connect. Also, we can capture images off of those cameras, and it has very limited gesture recognition for the time being. And I basically hustled all summer to try and get this thing out for Burning Man, and as you know, they don't move the start date for Burning Man just because one art project is late. So the code is in a little bit of disarray. And so the reason I'm doing the lightning talk is because I want to ask for a little bit of help. In about 3 weeks' time, there's going to be a Dallas Ruby hyperlocal hack night on March 19th. I'm going to pick a spot and bring a bunch of gear. And if people are interested in hacking around on this kind of project, it would be really fun to have some other people to work with. The requirements would be you need to love working with cool toys. And I appreciate finding people who have C++ experience working with evented Ruby, or folks that have any kind of an animation or game programming background, or really, if you just love working with cool toys. So that event, again, is going to be the next hyperlocal hack night. It'll be Tuesday, March 19th. And my email address is up here. This is a reference to the GitHub project, or you can just kind of find me in the hallway. And I finished early.
Hi, I'm Chris. I work for Living Social, assuming DHH hasn't fired me yet. You might remember me from such other lightning talks as the one I gave a few minutes ago. You all have heard of technical debt. I'm here to talk to you about technical intimidation. Do you know Rails? Do you know Sinatra? Do you know how to host a Rails engine in Sinatra? Can you program concurrently? Can you asynchronously stream hypermedia? I made that up. I don't know what that image means. Actually, I got all these images back, and Klavnik's up there, so maybe I didn't make it up. Do you know the difference between XSS, CSS, SCSS? Can you inject SQL into a cannoli? Can you find closure with your monads? Again, Google image. I don't know why, but I swear, 2 Charlie Browns if you do that. Does anyone understand what this is in JavaScript? Do you actually know that they're putting JavaScript on servers now? Which reminds me, I have a Kickstarter for hosting Oracle in my browser, so if you've got any loose change, let me know. Does anybody know what Adam Keyes is talking about? Did you know if you take out all the buzzwords from this, what you get is ASCII art of a troll face? All these phrases I took from recent Ruby and JavaScript weekly news editions. Does anyone here know all of this? If you said yes to yourself, you're lying, because I made that one up. Seriously, someone very prominent in our industry recently put this on their blog. He said, I was reluctant to ask a question because I wanted to be seen as savvy and on the ball. Now, I can totally relate to that. And if you can relate to that, well, Kent Beck can relate to that as well. And it's even not necessarily that. Sometimes it's just me and technology, and we're up late at night. Don't get the wrong idea. And I'm just staring at it, and I'm just thinking, I don't know what's going to go on. And frankly, it's going to leave me with this big feeling of shame. Now, there are two traits common to people. One is adaptability. The other is shame. And when you combine these two, you get hoarders. Now, it's one thing when you leave that out in the open like that, but for a lot of us, we live that way, like on our hard drives, thank you, Glenn, or in our minds and our hearts. And so shame is this thing that can drive us to this place. We're very adaptable, so we can figure out a way to live there, and then shame sticks around to make sure we don't leave. And the result of this is we get a lot of these messages that'll go in and out of our brains all through the day. Maybe not that last one. Jerry Weinberg was once asked, what do you consider the most important thing for a programmer to do when beginning a new project? He says, I think each should be sure they are in good physical condition, whatever, without nagging psychological problems. Well, these shame messages are certainly nagging psychological problems. And if we can adapt ourselves into bad situations, we can adapt ourselves out of bad situations. So let's deal with this. Software is hard. Steve McConnell, paraphrasing Dijkstra, says this, computing is the only profession in which a single mind is obliged to span the intellectual distance of 9 orders of magnitude. Eric Sink on his blog once detailed 46 levels of abstraction that his .NET application has to deal with. Raymond Chen, who's a well-known blogger from inside Microsoft, wrote a technical article on why it's a bad idea to delete a critical section, whatever that is, from inside the critical section, but after this long post finishes it with, but maybe there's a flaw in my logic. Good design is fractally hard. The more closely you focus on any given feature, the more rough edges you find to polish. And the only sane approach is to iterate until you get to a place that you care about and then move on. That's Jan Mickoski. I'm murdering your name, but I love your quote. NPR recently had an article about how hard it is for professionals to spot problems they are trained to find. So, if 83% of radiologists cannot see the gorilla in this image, if Kasparov can blunder away his queen in a game where he can see the entire board, but I can only see 0.02% of my code base at one single time, cut me some slack. But what about all the things? Look, you're not going to be able to learn all the things. And the good news is it doesn't matter, at least not to people like Martin Fowler. Given someone with broad design skills and someone who only knows a platform really well, which one would you prefer? Well, Martin will take the one with broad design skills. But what about everybody else who really does know all the things, or at least seems to know all the things? Well, the trick is don't be intimidated by these people. Learn from them. Pat Metheny's advice to young musicians is this: always be the worst in every band you're in. If you're the best guy there, you need to be in a different band. And we'll close with this quote from Dijkstra: we shall do a much better programming job, provided that we approach the task with a full appreciation of its tremendous difficulty, provided that we stick to modest and elegant programming languages, Ruby, provided that we respect the intrinsic limitations of the human mind and approach the task as very humble programmers. One last thing, Brené Brown has some wonderful, wonderful talks on the subject of shame. If you just Google TED and shame, she has some great TED Talks out there. Check them out. Do yourself a favor. That's me on Twitter. Thanks.